The fire in the forge cast long, dancing shadows across the walls of Anton Weber's small railway workshop. Sparks leaped like tiny insurgents, falling onto grease-stained floors and vanishing before anyone could touch them. Anton, a railway mechanic by trade, wiped the sweat from his brow and listened to the distant rumble of German supply trains rolling through the valley. Every clatter of wheels over steel rails reminded him that the war was advancing, that German armor was rolling unchecked across Europe, and that he was still behind, unnoticed, unarmed, and invisible. But that invisibility was about to change. The first spark came not from fire, but from rumor. Partisan fighters from the nearby hills brought a battered German anti-tank gun into his workshop. It was a 3.7-centimeter Pak 36, obsolete against modern Panzer IVs, but intact enough to study. Anton's eyes gleamed as he ran his fingers along the rifled barrel. He had no military training, only the experience of years shaping steel, measuring tolerances, and bending metal to his will. But as he studied the gun, the gears in his mind began to turn. If German engineers could make armor-piercing rounds, why couldn't a railway mechanic engineer a counter? By night, Anton sketched designs on grease-stained paper, diagrams of chambers, muzzle brakes, and sabot rounds. He recalled the physics of locomotives, the tensile stress on axles, the recoil absorbed by buffer springs, the forces distributed over wheels and rails. What if those same principles could be applied to artillery? Could a gun, built from railway materials, fire a shell that would puncture steel plates as thick as a train's boiler? The nights grew longer, colder. Anton worked by candlelight, melting down scavenged copper to fashion jackets for penetrator cores, forging barrels from railway axles pre-stressed like suspension rods, and improvising recoil systems from locomotive buffers. Each test shot, using makeshift sandbags as targets, produced a plume of smoke, a screech of stress, and occasionally success. The villagers watched in awe as shells tore through thick metal plates, leaving jagged holes and charred edges. By winter, Anton had created the first fully operational prototype, a small, portable, high-velocity gun that could be dismantled, transported, and reassembled by a handful of men. The partisan fighters named it the Linesman's Revenge, a nod to the railway mechanic who had given them hope. Then came the first real test. Dawn broke over a fog-choked valley where German reconnaissance tanks rumbled forward. The Linesman's Revenge was emplaced behind a ridge. Anton, crouching beside the crew, felt the weight of anticipation, the cold bite of fear. The first shell screamed downrange and struck the side of a Panzer III. The armor buckled, rivets sheared, and the tank's engine stuttered. Silence fell, broken only by the distant echoes of metal striking earth. Anton's heart pounded. He had not only built a weapon, he had turned his knowledge of rails, mechanics, and metallurgy into a tool of war. But there was no time to celebrate. German reinforcements were closing in. Orders to retreat came from the partisan commander. Anton grabbed the remaining rounds, dismantled the gun under cover of smoke, and vanished into the hills with his men. By the time the Germans discovered the destroyed tank, Anton Weber, the railway mechanic, was already a ghost. He had proven that a single man, armed with ingenuity and mettle, could rewrite the rules of engagement. Yet the war was far from over, and each day would demand more creativity, more risk, and more daring improvisation. The Linesman's Revenge had fired its first shot, but the battle for survival and invention had only just begun. Collapsible. Anton disappears into the hills, leaving behind a smoking, destroyed Panzer and the whispered legend of the railway mechanic who turned tools into terror. The forest was silent except for the crunch of snow under booted feet and the occasional groan of a distant locomotive. Anton Weber's hands were still black with grease, his fingers aching from hours at the lathe, but his mind burned hotter than any forge. The first test shot had proven the Linesman's Revenge could pierce German armor, but one success did not a weapon make. They needed repeatability, accuracy, and reliability, or the next encounter would be fatal. Anton returned to his workshop, which now smelled of molten copper, coal smoke, and tension. He spread blueprints across the workbench, the sketches overlapping like a map of battlefields yet to come. Every measurement mattered. The rifling's twist rate, the chamber's pre-stress, the sabot's copper jacket thickness, all had to work in harmony. A slight miscalculation could snap the barrel or blow the crew off their feet. But Anton was confident. His years on the railway had taught him about tolerances, about how metal bends under pressure, how thermal expansion can either kill machinery or preserve it. To train for real combat, he improvised a testing ground on a disused stretch of rail. He set up armored targets made from scrapped freight cars and thick steel plates scavenged from abandoned factories. Each shot was an experiment. One shell ricocheted, tearing a jagged hole through a support beam. Another embedded itself in frozen earth, its penetrator bent at an odd angle. Notes were taken meticulously: powder charge, barrel temperature, breech lubrication. Anton was creating a weapon not by following doctrine, but by iterative engineering under fire conditions. By February, the partisans had received their first batch of Anton's guns. Small, portable, and deadly accurate at short range, each gun had its own quirks. The men had to learn to anticipate recoil, to align the rifling with instinct, to calculate distance and target velocity without formal training. Anton became a teacher as much as an engineer, drilling his crew until muscle memory replaced theory. Their first coordinated operation came at dusk, when a German convoy of 3 Panzer IVs and supply trucks rumbled along a narrow mountain road. Anton's team positioned 2 guns on opposing ridges. Shadows lengthened. A single misfire would betray their location and doom them. The first shot was aimed at the lead tank side armor. The shell screamed, a hiss of compressed gas and friction, and impacted with a muffled roar. The armor folded inward like paper. The Panzer staggered, then halted. The second gun targeted the trailing tank, exploiting the same weakness. Chaos erupted. Supplies spilled into the snow. Engines roared and choked. The victory was decisive, but fleeting. German reinforcements arrived faster than anticipated, and the partisans were forced to abandon the position. Yet the linesman's revenge had proven its worth. Word spread through the resistance network. A railway mechanic had engineered a weapon capable of destroying modern German armor, and it could be moved by men on foot. Anton returned to his workshop, exhilarated but haunted. Every success demanded more ingenuity. Rounds needed refinement, barrels required heat treatment, and the ammunition supply had to be improvised from scavenged materials. He experimented with sabot designs, forged longer, hardened penetrators, and adjusted propellant mixtures. Each iteration brought greater velocity, greater penetration, and greater danger. A misfire could kill the crew or alert the enemy. One night, as snow fell silently over the rails, Anton studied a captured German ballistic manual. He traced diagrams with a shaky pencil, comparing rifling, chamber pressures, and armor thicknesses. He realized the Germans had been brilliant, but rigid. His advantage lay not in scale, but in adaptability. While factories churned out standardized weapons, Anton could tweak every part, every shot, to suit the battlefield. The chapter of learning, testing, and improvisation reached its climax when Anton fired a shell that cleanly penetrated a Panzer's frontal armor, a feat considered nearly impossible for such a small-caliber weapon. The echo of impact rolled through the valley. In that moment, Anton knew that a railway mechanic's workshop could produce a weapon rivaling industrial armaments. But there was no time to savor triumph. German patrols had spotted smoke from testing, and reprisals were already underway. Anton dismantled his equipment, concealed his creations, and melted into the forest once more. The linesman's revenge had proven its potential, but survival demanded secrecy, speed, and relentless cunning. Fog clung to the valley like a living thing, curling around rocks and trees, hiding the shapes of men and machines alike. Anton Weber crouched beside his crew, each hand resting on a linesman's revenge gun. Hearts beat in unison, synchronized by months of training and anticipation. The partisan unit had received intelligence of a German armored column moving through a narrow mountain pass. This was the moment for Anton's engineering to meet the battlefield, an ambush that could tip the scales for the first time in months. The ambush was dangerous. 3 Panzer IVs, supported by half-tracks and supply wagons, were moving steadily along the only road. Anton knew the Germans were well-trained and cautious. One misstep could mean death for the partisans and the destruction of his meticulously crafted weapons. Yet he also knew the advantage lay in terrain and surprise, not numbers. Fog, Elevation and knowledge of the road became allies as his team positioned the guns. The first gun was placed on a rocky ledge, hidden behind a fallen log. The second, 100 meters down, had a clear view of the pass's choke point. Ammunition was laid out in meticulous order, each round marked for penetration against different armor thicknesses. Anton whispered last instructions. Wait for the last tank to enter the gap. One shot at a time. Accuracy, not speed. As the Germans advanced, the valley held its breath. The lead Panzer rounded the corner, unaware of the eyes and steel above. Anton's hands were steady despite adrenaline burning his veins. The first shell fired, cutting through the side armor with a screech that echoed off the cliffs. The tank shuddered, crew alarms blaring, and then ground to a halt. Panic spread through the column. The second gun fired, hitting a half-track carrying supplies. The vehicle flipped, spilling fuel and munitions into the mud. German soldiers scrambled for cover, returning sporadic fire into the fog. Anton's heart pounded, not from fear, but from exhilaration. His design, improvised in a railway workshop months before, was proving deadly in combat. Rounds continued to fly, each shot calculated, each shell designed to maximize penetration without overstressing the barrel. The fog masked movement, allowing the partisans to reposition after every volley. By the time the Germans realized they were trapped, 2 Panzers were destroyed, 1 half-track disabled, and supplies lost. The ambush was near perfect. Yet victory carried immediate consequences. The sound of distant engines signaled reinforcements. Anton knew lingering would be suicide. Orders were shouted. The crew dismantled the guns with practiced precision. Barrels, cradles, and wheels were loaded onto makeshift sleds. Ammunition was secured in sacks. Within minutes, the partisans vanished into the trees, leaving behind burning wrecks and shattered morale among German troops. Anton allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. For months, he had been a mechanic turning scrap metal into tools of war. Now, his weapons had proven their worth. The Linesman's revenge was not just a prototype. It was a tactical equalizer against a technologically superior enemy. But the ambush also revealed the stakes. German patrols would be more vigilant. Partisan victories attracted attention and reprisal in equal measure. Anton understood the fragile line they walked. One error could destroy months of preparation. His guns were powerful, yes, but survival depended on discretion and cunning more than brute force. That night, beside a frozen stream, Anton examined the guns, cleaning rifling and adjusting breech tolerances. He studied each sabot, noting how the penetrator performed on different armor angles. Calculations filled his notebook. Mistakes could be fatal next time. The ambush was a victory, but the war was far from one. The chapter ended with a chilling thought. Anton watched the distant glow of German searchlights sweeping the valley and whispered to himself, "We won today, but the real war has only begun. Every shot I fire will be answered with fire, and the next one may be the last." The night the shells fell silent, Anton lay awake listening to the forest breathe. Victory had a strange aftertaste, metallic and urgent. He could not afford to rest on a single ambush. The Linesman's revenge had proven effective, but its flaws had been exposed under combat stress. Barrels overheated after rapid fire, sabot jackets sheared at extreme velocities, and supply shortages meant that every round had to count. If they were to become more than guerrilla nuisance, if they were to change the calculus of armored warfare in that sector, they needed engineering, not luck. Anton's workshop became a war room. Lantern light turned grease-streaked blueprints into battle maps. He gathered his best men, old drivers who understood ballast weight, a blacksmith who once forged ship bolts, and a young chemistry student with a knack for measuring burn rates in improvised propellants. Together they dissected every part of the weapon: chamber metallurgy, rifling profile, breech locking, recoil dynamics, and the sabot's interface with the barrel. Each failure from the ambush was logged like a casualty. Each small triumph, celebrated quietly with tobacco and stale bread. The first problem to tackle was heat. Repeated firing had blistered the barrel's inner liner, and recoil had loosened the crude locking wedges. Anton's solution mixed railway lore with ordnance basics. He relayed barrels from high-grade axle steel, then sent them to a covert tempering furnace, an old kiln repurposed beneath the station. where he controlled quenching and annealing cycles to achieve a balance of hardness and ductility. To mitigate heat buildup, he designed an external water jacket, a segmented sleeve that could be clamped around the barrel and replenished from rainwater. It was crude, but when cooled between shots, it extended the barrel life dramatically. Next came the sabot and penetrator. Initial sabots disintegrated at high velocity, shedding fragments that ate away at accuracy. Anton turned to a design borrowed from locomotive practice, a tapered, interlocking jacket that would expand under acceleration and then peel away cleanly after muzzle exit. He machined light alloy pedals, salvaged from agricultural machinery, riveted to a turned steel core. For the penetrator, he experimented with various steels, carbonizing some cores to create a hardened tip capable of mushrooming rather than shattering upon impact. It was painstaking work, often measured in millimeters and in the charred smells of failed tests. But engineering a better gun was only half the battle. Logistics and tactics had to evolve in tandem. Anton organized mobile mounting systems that allowed the gun to be disassembled and hauled on sleds or on the back of a captured half-track. He devised quick-release clamps and alignment pins so a trained crew could dismantle, move, and reassemble in 10 minutes. He instituted a firing doctrine: two-man teams for ambushes at choke points, a spotter to read the tank's traverse, and a dedicated crewman to manage sabot selection based on known armor thicknesses and angling. Training took a new urgency. The partisans had been brave, but bravery without discipline was costly. Anton built a regimen that married marksmanship with mechanical empathy. How to feel barrel harmonics, how to listen for the subtle stall that preceded a squib round, how to reseat a breech block by hand if the extractor failed under frost. He drilled night emplacements, silent movement, and the ritualized procedure for cooling the barrel after 2 rounds. Men learned to become extensions of the machine, anticipating its temper and respecting its limits. As the weapon matured, so did its strategic use. Anton shifted from opportunistic ambushes to deliberate interdiction. Rather than pick off single tanks, his teams targeted supply lines, command elements, and fuel convoys, soft parts of the Wehrmacht that, once disrupted, amplified the tactical effect of a destroyed armored vehicle. The gun's psychological impact mattered too. German patrol reports began to carry phrases like ghost guns and railway pieces, and troops moved with the weary caution of hunted animals. However, innovation breeds countermeasures. German engineers adapted by reinforcing vulnerable panels and changing convoy tactics, adding screened escorts and varying routes. Radio reconnaissance intensified. One evening, returning from a reconnaissance where Anton had mapped a prime ambush point, his scout whispered the worst news. The enemy had started using small diesel tractors to plow tracks and used aerial drones, reconnaissance kites, and tethered cameras to sweep potential ambush sites. The battlefield was learning, and so must they. Anton didn't flinch. He sat at his bench, pencil tracing new sketches. If the Germans hardened the sides, then they would need to strike weaker points: turret rings, engine decks, fuel tanks. If aerial sweeps scouted the ridges, the team would switch to mobile night attacks under low clouds. He would not outgun the factory. He would outthink it. The chapter closed with a single, decisive illustration. At dusk, Anton climbed the hill overlooking a new stretch of railway. Gun blueprints rolled under his arm, and watched a German armored train thunder past. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He folded his plans, tucked them under his jacket, and vanished into the scrub with the calm certainty of a man who knew that engineering might win battles, but cunning decides survival. Rain-slicked roads glistened under a steel-gray sky as Anton Weber's partisan unit hunkered in the hills. Months of engineering, testing, and training had led to this moment. The Linesman's revenge was no longer an experimental weapon. It was battle-ready, improved, and deadly accurate. But theory and trial could not fully prepare them for real combat against an armored battalion. Intelligence reports were precise. A German supply convoy, 2 Panzer IVs, a Stu-G3, and half a dozen trucks loaded with fuel and ammunition, was scheduled to traverse a narrow pass at dawn. The choke point was perfect for ambush. Anton's mind raced as he positioned the first gun atop a rocky ridge, the second nestled in the underbrush 40 meters away. Each man knew their role: spot, load, fire, relocate. Precision was not optional. Survival depended on it. The first light of morning painted the valley in muted gold. A distant rumble grew steadily into the unmistakable clatter of tank treads. Fog clung to the valley, a natural ally hiding Anton and his crew. The first shot was calculated, aimed at the side of the lead Panzer IV. The linesman's revenge screamed, a thin whine of compressed gases, and the shell struck true. Armor buckled. Rivets sheared. The tank's engine stuttered and died. A muffled explosion rattled nearby rocks. The fuel tank had been pierced. The Germans scrambled, but confusion reigned. Anton's second gun fired, a sabot round piercing the Stu G3's rear armor. Smoke and fire erupted. Trucks swerved into ditches, supplies spilled, and the convoy stalled completely. For a brief, breathtaking moment, victory seemed assured. But the true test came unexpectedly. The lead Panzer, though damaged, began reversing, attempting to extricate itself. Its crew fired sporadically, and German reinforcements were already heard approaching from the far ridge. Anton realized that precision alone would not win this engagement. They needed speed, mobility, and improvisation. Orders were shouted. Crews dismantled the guns under the cover of smoke and early morning fog. Barrels, cradles, and sleds were loaded with practiced efficiency. Every movement was rehearsed. Every misstep could be fatal. A German half-track turned the corner too early and spotted the last gun emplacement. A fusillade of machine gun fire struck the position, splintering nearby rocks. Anton dove into the mud, clutching a sabot round to his chest, teeth gritted against the cold and fear. The linesman's revenge fired one last time, the shot piercing the half-track's armor, halting its advance. Smoke, fire, and metal echoed in the valley. When silence returned, the partisans were already retreating along concealed trails, guns disassembled and ammunition secured. 3 armored vehicles destroyed, 2 half-tracks disabled, and supply convoys disrupted. The ambush was a tactical success, but survival was never guaranteed. Later, as Anton examined the guns and field notes, he realized something crucial. This first true test had proven more than just the weapon's lethality. It had revealed the critical interplay between engineering, logistics, and human discipline. One minor error in timing, a misjudged angle of fire, or a poorly cooled barrel could have led to catastrophe. The linesman's revenge was effective, but it demanded respect, skill, and continuous innovation. The ambush also sent a psychological shockwave. German patrol reports carried rumors of ghost guns, small, mobile artillery appearing from nowhere and striking with deadly precision. Anton understood that fear could be as effective a weapon as metal, and that his ingenuity had created something larger than a simple gun. It was a statement. A railway mechanic could challenge the might of industrial warfare with intellect, discipline, and courage. That night, in a damp forest hideout, Anton traced sketches of armor penetration patterns and barrel stresses. Smoke from his small fire drifted into the dark sky, mingling with fog. He knew the Germans would adapt, fortify, and hunt harder next time. But he also knew that the linesman's revenge had been baptized in fire and survived. The valley had grown quieter, but Anton Weber knew better than to trust silence. German forces were methodical, precise, and ruthless. After the devastating ambush on the convoy, the enemy had begun to adapt their tactics. Armored patrols increased, routes were changed daily, and engineers reinforced vulnerable points on Panzer IVs and Stu GS. Reports from scouts were grim. Traps had become rarer, and the Germans were studying their own casualty patterns, trying to predict the railway mechanic's next move. Anton felt the pressure like a weight pressing on his chest. His linesman's revenge guns had proven effective, but one thing was clear: stagnation was death. The enemy adapted faster than improvised weapons could overwhelm. He needed to innovate, or risk annihilation of his crews and the destruction of months of work. The first problem was armor. German engineers, reading reports of ambushes, began reinforcing side panels and turret fronts with additional plating. Anton studied captured blueprints, sketches from scouts, and photographs of damaged vehicles. He realized that velocity alone would no longer suffice. The sabot rounds must be redesigned to penetrate thicker armor at sharper angles. He experimented with longer, hardened steel penetrators and improved the sabot's aerodynamic profile to reduce drag and maintain velocity across distance. Next, he addressed mobility. Previously, the guns had been moved on sleds or carried manually, limiting placement options. Anton devised a collapsible mount, a combination of a tubular frame and detachable wheels salvaged from freight wagons. The new design allowed a crew of 4 to transport and deploy the gun in under 8 minutes, giving them flexibility to strike and vanish before German reinforcements arrived. Camouflage became another focus. Dense forests could conceal men, but not the glint of steel barrels or the smoke of repeated firing. Anton coated the barrels with soot and tree resin, devised cloth shrouds from patched uniforms, and even experimented with rudimentary smoke generators using chemical mixtures scavenged from abandoned factories. Each adaptation increased the survivability of his crews while preserving the gun's lethality. The first real test of these modifications came on a fog-choked morning. A reinforced German column, larger than any before, moved along a narrow ravine. Anton's teams had been tracking it for days. Every gun had been upgraded with the new sabot design, each crew trained to exploit weak spots in the improved armor. They waited. The ambush began with precise timing. Shells tore into the side armor of 2 Panzer IVs, the sabot rounds punching clean holes and spiking internal fires. The collapsible mounts allowed the guns to be repositioned after each volley, preventing counter-battery targeting. The Germans were stunned. What had been a predictable ambush now seemed like an orchestrated symphony of destruction, and yet it was engineered by a railway mechanic who had never set foot in an armory school. However, the Germans were learning too. Reconnaissance planes spotted the ambush site, forcing Anton to improvise an escape. Smoke grenades masked their withdrawal, but one gun was hit by a grazing round. Damage was minor, but it was a stark reminder. Adaptation was a two-way street. The enemy learned, the partisans adapted, and Anton was locked in a constant battle of intellect and engineering. That night, beside a frozen creek, Anton examined his crews and guns. The linesman's revenge had become more than a weapon. It was a dynamic system, mechanical ingenuity married to tactical intelligence. But Anton knew that every German adaptation required a new solution. The battlefield was evolving faster than he could have imagined, and each victory increased the stakes. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke. Anton Weber crouched behind a boulder, the linesman's revenge loaded and ready. Months of refinement, of trial and error, had brought them here. Intelligence had reported a major German armored offensive, a force of 10 Panzer IVs, 3 Stu G3s, and accompanying supply trucks, heading to crush partisan strongholds in the valley. This was no mere convoy. This was a test of everything Anton had built, designed, and taught. A failure here could erase months of ingenuity and every life in his crew. The ambush site had been chosen with painstaking care. Narrow ravines, fallen trees, and concealed ridges created a killing corridor. Crews were positioned silently, every man frozen in place, rifles and artillery ready. The fog thickened, swallowing shadows and giving Anton the one advantage he could count on: surprise. At first, the Germans moved cautiously, unaware of the trap. The first shot fired from Anton's forward gun, aiming at the lead Panzer IV. The sabot round screamed, punching through armor like a blade. Smoke and fire erupted, and the tank stalled. The convoy faltered. The second gun followed, disabling a Stu G3. Chaos spread. The mechanized advance slowed to a crawl as partisans struck relentlessly, moving their guns between ridges and trees to avoid counterfire. Anton's heart raced. He had designed the linesman's revenge to be precise, lethal, and mobile, but this was the first time it would be tested under sustained, large-scale engagement. Ammunition ran low faster than anticipated. Barrels heated under continuous fire. Sweat and frost mingled on his hands. One misfire could destroy the gun, and one destroyed gun could cost lives. Yet the partisans continued their disciplined execution, each shot a calculated decision based on Anton's rigorous training. Then disaster struck. A German reconnaissance half-track, moving faster than expected, discovered one of the gun positions. Its machine gun fire shredded the camouflage and struck a nearby gun's carriage. Sparks flew. Wood splintered. Smoke rose. Anton realized that without immediate adaptation, the ambush could fail. He shouted orders, and the crew worked with precision born of desperation. Barrels were lifted, sleds relocated, and new firing angles calculated in seconds. The Germans, confused and battered, were now forced to react to the mechanics' ingenuity. Shell after shell found weak points: fuel tanks, side panels, tracks. 2 Panzer IVs and 1 Stu-G were destroyed outright. Supply trucks exploded or veered into ditches. For every adaptation the Germans had made, Anton had an answer: repositioning, altered sabot types, adjusted firing angles. The Linesman's revenge was not just artillery. It was a system of intelligence, mechanics, and human will. By midday, the valley was littered with wreckage. Smoke and fire painted the landscape in stark relief. Anton's crew regrouped behind a ridge, exhausted but victorious. Every gun survived, though some bore scars from near misses. They had not just ambushed an armored column. They had demonstrated the power of ingenuity against industrial might. But the turning point was not merely the destruction of enemy tanks. It was the realization Anton had. His methods were scalable, adaptable, and psychologically devastating. The Germans would fear the unseen weapon, the ghost artillery that struck from hidden ridges and forests. Morale among the partisans surged, fueled not by brute strength but by the knowledge that skill, planning, and mechanical genius could defy overwhelming odds. The chapter closed as Anton gazed across the valley. Smoke curled into the foggy sky. He felt exhaustion, pride, and an unspoken warning. The enemy would adapt again, and the next engagement could be far deadlier. The Linesman's revenge had survived its first true test, but the war for survival, for engineering supremacy, and for tactical ingenuity was only beginning. The forest seemed alive, whispering secrets of steel and fire. Anton Weber crouched in the underbrush, listening to the distant rumble of German reinforcements. The last ambush had been a success, but the enemy was adapting faster than ever. Their patrols were sharper, convoys better armored, and reconnaissance aircraft more frequent. The Linesman's revenge had proven its lethality, but survival now required ingenuity beyond the design of any gun. The first test of this necessity came at twilight. A supply column, larger and better protected than any previous, moved through a winding ravine. Anton's team had only 2 guns ready for action, and their ammunition was limited. To make matters worse, a sudden gust of wind scattered their smoke screens, revealing the silhouette of one gun position. German machine gun fire peppered the rocks, splintering stone and sending debris flying. The Linesman's revenge could destroy tanks, but it could not outrun tracer rounds. Anton acted fast. Drawing on his years as a railway mechanic, he improvised a rail-mounted escape system. Old tracks, abandoned by the German army months before, were repurposed as a slide for the gun carriage. A crude braking system, adapted from a freight car wheel and buffer, allowed the crew to push the gun along rails out of enemy sight. In seconds, what had seemed trapped became mobile. The first gun rolled down the makeshift track, the sabot round still loaded, smoke trailing like a phantom. German soldiers were bewildered. They had seen the emplacement, but not its retreat. Anton and his crew darted along concealed paths, disassembling the second gun on the move. Within minutes, both weapons were hidden among the thick trees, ready to strike again. These escapes were not just mechanical. Anton trained his men in camouflage, misdirection, and psychological tactics. Dummy firing positions were created with logs, scrap metal, and smoke generators, tricking German reconnaissance into believing guns were still in position. When the enemy advanced, shells were fired from entirely different ridges. It became a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Germans searched for weapons that were never there, while Anton struck from unexpected angles. One particular encounter tested the Linesman's revenge like never before. A column of 4 Panzer IVs and a half-track unexpectedly split to investigate suspicious tracks. Anton realized the route they were taking could lead directly to his men. Without hesitation, he rigged a collapsing bridge using railway ties, wire, and counterweights. When the lead tank rolled onto it, the bridge gave way. The Panzer skidded, partially damaged but unable to continue, while the partisans retreated under cover of smoke and fog. The Linesman's revenge fired from a hidden ridge, disabling another vehicle before disappearing again. Nightfall brought only temporary relief. Anton sat beside a smoldering fire, exhausted, notebook in hand, analyzing each maneuver, every shot fired, every escape executed. He understood the harsh truth. A weapon alone could not win this war. Mobility, deception, and constant adaptation were as vital as metallurgy or ballistics. Each ambush had become a learning ground, teaching both him and his crew the unforgiving arithmetic of guerrilla warfare. The chapter closed with Anton looking up at a crescent moon, his guns hidden in the forest, his crew safe, for now. He knew the Germans would continue to adapt, fortify, and hunt harder. Yet he felt a spark of grim satisfaction. Ingenuity could outpace brute force, at least for a time. The linesman's revenge was no longer just a gun. It was a symbol of relentless adaptation, a mechanical ghost haunting the armored behemoths of the enemy. Dawn broke over the valley with a pale, cold light. Anton Weber's heart pounded as he surveyed the narrow pass ahead. Intelligence had confirmed the worst. A full battalion of German armored vehicles, including 7 Panzer IVs, 2 Tiger I tanks, and accompanying half-tracks, were advancing to crush the partisan stronghold. This was no longer a skirmish. It was a decisive confrontation. The linesman's revenge had faced convoys, small armored units, and reinforced columns, but nothing like this. Anton's crew was tense, but disciplined. Every gun had been upgraded with the latest modifications: longer barrels, improved sabots, reinforced mounts, and collapsible, rail-based transport systems. Ammunition was rationed meticulously. Each round was precious. Anton ran through the battle plan one last time. Ambush from concealed ridges, simultaneous strikes at weak points, rapid relocation after every volley. Any mistake would be catastrophic. As the first Panzer IVs entered the choke point, the silence broke. The forward gun fired, the sabot round slicing through side armor with a scream of compressed gas and steel. The tank shuddered, smoke curling from its engine. The second gun targeted a Tiger I, aiming at the vulnerable rear plate. The shot struck true, denting the armor and knocking systems offline. Chaos erupted. German vehicles halted, scrambled, and attempted to return fire. The ambush was brutal, but Anton knew it was only half the battle. Reinforcements were approaching from the flanks, and aerial reconnaissance spotted their position. German soldiers advanced cautiously, trying to outmaneuver the hidden guns. Anton ordered his teams to dismantle and relocate rapidly. Barrels and cradles were lifted, sleds repositioned, and new firing angles calculated on the fly. Precision and speed became the only means of survival. Yet disaster struck. One Tiger I, despite being partially disabled, returned fire. A shell grazed the forward gun, splintering the wooden mount and sending shards into the frozen earth. The crew dove for cover. Another Panzer IV fired on the second position, forcing a hurried relocation under heavy fire. Anton realized the stakes. One mistake could destroy the weapons, the crew, and their chance at victory. Despite the chaos, the linesman's revenge proved its worth. The sabot rounds penetrated armor at impossible angles, disabling vehicles and halting the German advance. Smoke, fire, and shattered steel filled the valley. Each ambush, each relocation, was executed with disciplined precision. The partisans, once outmatched, now dictated the battle, turning terrain, fog, and ingenuity into lethal advantages. Hours passed. The German forces, frustrated and disoriented, began to withdraw. The partisans regrouped, weapons intact, but crews exhausted. Anton surveyed the battlefield. Wrecked vehicles, burning fuel trucks, and the remnants of armored columns stretched across the valley. The linesman's revenge had survived, its creators triumphant, but barely. Anton understood the true lesson of this confrontation. Ingenuity, adaptability, and human will could rival industrial power, but victory came at immense risk. Every enhancement, every escape maneuver, every sabot round had been tested to the limit. The linesman's revenge had proven itself not just as a weapon, but as a system, an extension of Anton's mind and his crew's discipline. The chapter closed as Anton climbed a ridge, the valley below still smoking from the engagement. He gazed at the wreckage, the surviving crew regrouping, and the fading outlines of retreating Germans. In that moment, he realized that survival in war depended as much on adaptation as on firepower. The linesman's revenge had reached its peak, not because it was the strongest weapon, but because it embodied cunning, skill, and relentless innovation. The forest was quiet at last, but Anton Weber's mind raced. The linesman's revenge had endured ambushes, large-scale battles, and relentless German adaptation. Each gun had been tested to its limits, each round a testament to months of engineering, trial, and improvisation. Now, as the war moved into new regions, Anton understood that the weapon he had created was more than a tool of destruction. It was a symbol of ingenuity, resilience, and the power of human intellect against overwhelming odds. News of the ambushes and the phantom artillery spread beyond the partisan units. German reports spoke in hushed tones of ghostly guns appearing on ridges, striking armored columns with uncanny precision. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence noted the impact on morale. Even small, isolated victories could shift the balance, instilling confidence among resistance groups. Anton realized that his work had created not only a weapon but a legacy, one that would influence tactics, inspire innovation, and prove the importance of adaptability in war. But the linesman's revenge was not without cost. Crews were exhausted, ammunition scarce, and every victory carried the constant shadow of German retaliation. Anton devoted himself to teaching new recruits, passing on the knowledge of construction, sabotage, and battlefield improvisation. He emphasized discipline, precision, and respect for the machine. The guns were portable, but their effectiveness depended on human skill, intuition, and quick thinking. They were as much a mental exercise as a mechanical one. As months passed, Anton's ingenuity evolved into a doctrine. Other resistance groups began replicating his designs, adapting local materials to create similar high-velocity, mobile anti-tank weapons. Techniques learned from railway engineering, pre-stressed barrels, sabot rounds, improvised recoil systems, spread like wildfire among partisans across the region. Anton's workshops became secret hubs of innovation, producing not only weapons but strategies for ambush, escape, and deception. Yet, beyond the immediate battlefield, Anton reflected on the broader significance. The linesman's revenge proved that one individual, armed with knowledge, creativity, and determination, could influence the course of engagements far beyond their numbers. It was a lesson in adaptability, an enduring reminder that ingenuity could challenge industrial might, and that clever engineering could turn vulnerability into strength. In the final operation before the war's end in their region, Anton orchestrated a coordinated series of ambushes along critical supply routes. The Germans, increasingly wary and frustrated, altered tactics and routes, giving the partisans control of key terrain. The linesman's revenge was used sparingly but decisively, disabling vehicles, cutting off supplies, and striking fear into armored units. By this point, the guns were a legend. Partisan fighters spoke of them in reverent tones, and German soldiers whispered about ghostly artillery that could not be pinned or predicted. The war eventually moved on, the forests quieting as larger armies shifted fronts. Anton dismantled the remaining guns, hiding components in secret caches. He knew the industrial war would continue, but the lessons of the linesman's revenge, innovation, adaptability, and disciplined execution would endure in the minds of those who had survived and learned. Years later, when Anton recounted his experiences, he spoke not of glory or medals, but of the importance of observation, calculation, and courage. He emphasized that survival in war was a balance of intellect and action, and that ingenuity could achieve what brute force alone could not. The guns, once forged from railway axles and scrap metal, had become more than instruments of war. They were symbols of human resourcefulness under pressure, proof that a single mind could outthink and outmaneuver a mechanized giant.